In a tranquil lakeside community in Alabama, a 72-year-old retired bank executive was about to turn her family's world upside down. What began as a simple visit to help with her new grandchild transformed into a financial reckoning when Eleanor Williams confronted her daughter-in-law's explosive declaration. "This isn't a hotel." The words hung in the air like a slap. But Eleanor wasn't just any grandmother, she was the woman who had single-handedly managed the family's finances for decades. Her calculated departure would expose hidden debts and shake the foundations of their comfortable suburban existence forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of pine and lake water as Eleanor Williams gathered her courage on the front porch of her son's two-story Colonial home. Her fingers hesitated over the doorbell, not from nervousness about seeing her first grandchild, but from the unmistakable feeling of being an outsider in what should have been a welcoming family moment. 72 years had taught Eleanor to recognize when she was stepping into hostile territory, a skill honed through for decades as a banking executive in Birmingham where she'd broken countless glass ceilings and managed billion-dollar portfolios. The pristine yard with its meticulously trimmed hedges and coordinated seasonal decorations spoke volumes about her daughter-in-law's priorities. "Mom, you made it," her son Michael's voice broke through her thoughts as the door swung open. His smile seemed genuine but strained around the edges, his eyes darting between Eleanor and something inside the house. "Let me take your bags." Eleanor embraced her son, noticing the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights with a newborn. "How's my grandson doing? And Vanessa?" she asked, stepping into the foyer where family photos lined the walls, pictures that curiously featured very few of Michael's childhood or his father. "They're both upstairs. Vanessa just got the baby down for a nap." Michael's voice dropped slightly. "She's been pretty exhausted with everything." Eleanor nodded, understanding the challenges of new motherhood. What she didn't yet understand was why her offers to help over the past month had been repeatedly delayed or deflected until Michael had finally issued this reluctant invitation. The house was immaculate, almost unnaturally so for a home with a 3-week-old infant. Designer furniture arranged at precise angles, decorative pillows that appeared never to have been compressed by actual use, and not a single baby item visible in the living areas. It was a showroom, not a nursery. "Michael, your mother is here?" Vanessa's voice floated down from the top of the stairs before she appeared, looking remarkably put together for someone allegedly just emerging from putting a newborn to sleep. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her casual loungewear clearly expensive, and her smile as practiced as a pageant contestant's. "Eleanor, welcome," Vanessa said, descending the stairs without rushing. The emphasis on Eleanor's full name rather than Mom or even Mrs. Williams was subtle but unmistakable. "I hope your drive wasn't too tiring. At your age, those long stretches on the highway can be so taxing." "At your age?" The phrase lingered in the air like a small insult wrapped in concern. Eleanor had driven that same route from Birmingham to Lake Martin hundreds of times, including just last month for a banking conference where she'd been the keynote speaker. "The drive was lovely," Eleanor replied with the practiced diplomacy that had served her well in negotiating with difficult clients. "The fall colors are at their peak." Vanessa's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, we've prepared the guest room for you. Michael can show you up while I check on Ethan." She glanced at her husband with an expression Eleanor recognized. Immediately, expectation of compliance. The guest room was at the far end of the hallway, as distant as possible from the master suite and nursery. It was tastefully decorated in neutral tones with hotel-like precision, no personal touches, no family photographs, nothing to suggest this was a room where family was welcomed rather than accommodated. "I thought you might want to rest after your drive," Michael said, placing her suitcase on the luggage rack that seemed more appropriate for a Hilton than a family home. "Vanessa is very particular about keeping Ethan on a strict schedule, so dinner will be at 7. "I'd love to see my grandson first, if he's awake," Eleanor said, watching her son's expression carefully. Michael hesitated, shifting his weight between feet. "Maybe after his next feeding." Vanessa is very careful about Ethan's exposure to minimize his exposure to germs. Eleanor had raised 3 children, including Michael, had been fully vaccinated, and had taken a COVID test before driving up specifically because she anticipated such concerns. But she recognized the excuse for what it was, not health precautions, but boundary setting. Her daughter-in-law was establishing territory. "Of course," Eleanor replied smoothly. "I'll freshen up and see you at dinner." When Michael left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt like the securing of a perimeter, Eleanor sat on the edge of the pristine guest bed. The mattress was firm and unwelcoming, the sheets smelling of harsh detergent rather than the lavender sachets she'd gifted Vanessa last Christmas. She glanced at her phone, scrolling to a text from her daughter Catherine. "How's it going with the Ice Queen and baby Ethan?" Eleanor typed carefully. "Just arrived. Haven't been permitted an audience with His Royal Highness yet." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine's response was immediate. "Surprise, surprise. Want me to drive up this weekend for reinforcements?" "Let me assess the battlefield first," Eleanor replied, a smile tugging at her lips despite the situation. The dinner that evening was a masterclass in passive aggression disguised as hospitality. Vanessa had prepared an elaborate meal that appeared more designed for Instagram than actual consumption, artfully arranged but minimally portioned, with no consideration for Eleanor's well-known dislike of cilantro, which featured prominently in every dish. "I hope you don't mind that we're eating so late," Vanessa said, pouring sparkling water rather than the wine that sat opened but unoffered on the counter. "With Ethan's schedule, we've had to adjust our routines." "Not at all," Eleanor replied, though she typically ate earlier. "How is the little one sleeping?" "Actually, he's remarkably settled for his age," Vanessa said with the tone of someone who believed their parenting was exceptional. "The lactation consultant says it's because I'm following the feeding and sleep schedule so rigorously. Many grandparents don't understand how important structured routines are for infant development now. Parenting has evolved significantly since your day. Another small barb wrapped in modern wisdom. "Research does evolve," Eleanor agreed diplomatically. "Though I've found that babies haven't changed much in their basic needs over the generations." Michael interjected quickly, clearly sensing tension. "Mom was actually part of a longitudinal child development study at UAB when I was a baby. They were early advocates of responsive parenting." Vanessa's smile tightened slightly. "How interesting. Though I believe the American Academy of Pediatrics has updated their recommendations several times since then. We're following Dr. Whitehall's method. He's written several books on optimal infant brain development." Eleanor recognized the name, a controversial figure whose expensive parenting programs had been criticized for causing unnecessary anxiety in new parents and lacking peer-reviewed evidence. But she simply nodded, choosing her battles carefully. "I've brought some things for Ethan," Eleanor said, changing the subject. "Including the quilt my mother made for Michael when he was born." "That's so thoughtful," Vanessa replied with practiced politeness. "Though we're being very careful about fabrics that come into contact with Ethan. Dust mites and allergens, you understand. Perhaps it could be something he displays when he's older." Translation: the family heirloom would be stored away indefinitely, deemed unsuitable by modern standards. Throughout dinner, Eleanor noticed how rarely Michael spoke unless prompted. How his eyes constantly darted to Vanessa for approval before answering questions, and how he seemed to physically occupy less space than he had during his last visit to Birmingham. Her confident, accomplished son, a successful architectural engineer with his own firm, seemed diminished in his own home. When a small cry emanated from the baby monitor on the counter, Eleanor's heart leapt at the first sound of her grandson. But Vanessa immediately stood. "I'll get him. Michael, why don't you show your mother the photos from Ethan's newborn shoot while I feed him?" "Couldn't I come with you?" Eleanor asked. "I've been so looking forward to meeting him." Vanessa paused, her expression momentarily unguarded and clearly annoyed. "He's going to be very hungry, and I don't want him getting overstimulated before bedtime. Tomorrow morning would be better. First impressions are important, and we want Ethan's first memory of his grandmother to be positive, not when he's fussy." The absurdity of a 3-week-old forming first impression memories was left unchallenged as Vanessa disappeared upstairs. Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling through professional photographs of Ethan, beautiful images of a sleeping infant arranged in elaborate poses with props that cost more than Eleanor's first car. "He's perfect, isn't he?" Michael asked, his face softening with genuine love. "Absolutely beautiful," Eleanor agreed, studying the images for glimpses of Michael as a baby, seeing hints of her late husband around the eyes. "He has your father's chin." Michael swallowed hard. "I think so too, though Vanessa says he looks just like her brother." Eleanor placed her hand over her son's. "How are you doing, really? New fatherhood can be overwhelming." For a moment, Michael's carefully maintained facade cracked. "It's a lot. Vanessa has very specific ideas about how everything should be done. The right swaddle technique, the exact formula supplementation amount, the precise angle to hold him during burping. Sometimes I feel like I need a manual just to pick up my own son." "You're allowed to trust your instincts," Eleanor said gently. "You're his father." Michael glanced toward the stairs. "Vanessa's read every book, joined all the online parenting groups. She knows more about this stuff than I do. Book knowledge is different from parent wisdom. Both have value, Eleanor replied. But never forget that you have something valuable to offer too. When Vanessa returned an hour later without the baby, explaining that Ethan had fallen back asleep, Eleanor accepted that she wouldn't be meeting her grandson that evening. Instead, she listened as Vanessa dominated the conversation with detailed explanations of their pediatrician's credentials, the exclusive preschool they'd already placed Ethan on a waiting list for, and thinly veiled suggestions that Eleanor's parenting generation had relied on outdated and potentially harmful practices. We're not using any of those old-fashioned cry-it-out methods, Vanessa explained with the air of someone announcing they'd abandoned barbaric customs. Studies show that responsive parenting creates more secure attachment styles. I never let any of my children cry it out either, Eleanor noted mildly. Though we called it common sense rather than attachment parenting back then. As the evening wore on, Eleanor observed the dynamics of the household with the same analytical eye she'd used to evaluate struggling banks during her career. The beautiful home was leveraged with a mortgage that stretched their finances thin. The designer furniture appeared to be recent purchases. Vanessa's casual references to their country club membership and the nanny they planned to hire once she returned to her marketing director position suggested a lifestyle that significantly exceeded what Eleanor knew of Michael's income. More concerning was her son's behavior, the way he deferred to Vanessa on every topic, how he seemed to physically brace himself before offering an opinion, how rarely he made eye contact when speaking. These were patterns Eleanor recognized from his teenage years when his father's criticism had temporarily crushed his confidence. It had taken years of careful rebuilding to help Michael find his voice again, and now it seemed to be slipping away once more. When Eleanor excused herself to her room for the night, she sent another text to Catherine, "Haven't met Ethan yet." Apparently grandmothers are germ vectors and purveyors of outdated parenting wisdom. Catherine's response was immediate, "Want me to send a hazmat suit so you can hold your own grandson? This is ridiculous." Eleanor sighed, preparing for bed in the impersonal guest room that felt more like quarantine than family accommodation. As she was setting her alarm, she noticed something that made her pause, a small notation in her banking app showing a recent substantial transfer from her account to Michael and Vanessa's joint account. The emergency request had come 3 weeks ago, $12,000 for unexpected medical expenses related to Ethan's birth, despite their supposedly comprehensive insurance. Eleanor had transferred the money without question, wanting to ensure her grandson had whatever care he needed. But looking at her surroundings, the clearly new living room furniture, Vanessa's designer loungewear, the high-end kitchen renovation that appeared recently completed, she wondered where that money had actually gone. The pattern wasn't new. Over the past 2 years since Michael and Vanessa's marriage, there had been multiple emergencies requiring financial assistance. Eleanor had helped without hesitation, viewing it as supporting her son during his transition to married life. But the emergencies never seemed to affect their lifestyle or prompt any budget adjustments. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Michael entered, looking like a teenager again with his uncertain posture and worried eyes. "Just wanted to check if you have everything you need," he said, though his expression suggested he had more to say. "I'm fine," Eleanor assured him, patting the edge of the bed in invitation. "Come sit for a minute." Michael glanced over his shoulder before closing the door and joining her. "I know today didn't go as planned. Vanessa is just very protective of Ethan." "That's natural for new mothers," Eleanor said carefully. "Though I am looking forward to actually meeting my grandson tomorrow." Michael nodded quickly. "Definitely, first thing after his morning routine. It's just..." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Vanessa has some very specific ideas about how things should be done with Ethan. It would mean a lot to me if you could just follow her lead, even if you might have done things differently." "Of course," Eleanor replied, studying her son's face. "Is everything okay, Michael? You seem stressed, and not just new parent tired." For a moment, it appeared he might confide in her. A flash of the old Michael, the one who'd talked through problems with her openly, appeared in his eyes. But then his expression shuddered. "It's just the normal adjustments. New baby, Vanessa's hormones still balancing out. The usual stuff." His tone was dismissive, but his fingers twisted anxiously in his lap. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something else." "Here it comes," Eleanor thought. "We've had some unexpected expenses with the nursery renovation and some of Vanessa's medical needs after the birth," Michael began, not quite meeting her eyes. "The contractor found some issues with the wiring that had to be completely redone. And Vanessa needed some specialized postpartum care that insurance wouldn't cover." Eleanor glanced at the designer watch on her son's wrist, a new addition since she'd last seen him, and thought of Vanessa's pristine appearance that showed no signs of difficult recovery. "What kind of expenses are we talking about?" she asked. Michael named a figure that would have covered 6 months of Eleanor's mortgage. It would just be a loan until my next project payment comes through. 3 months, tops. It wasn't the first such request, nor the largest. But it was the first that Eleanor met with hesitation, her banker's instincts finally overriding her maternal impulse to provide unconditionally. That's a significant amount, Michael. I'd like to understand more about your financial situation before making that kind of commitment. Her son's face flushed. You don't trust me? It's not about trust, Eleanor explained gently. It's about making sure my help is actually helping, not enabling patterns that might be harmful in the long run. Michael stood abruptly. Vanessa was right. You've never approved of her, and now you're using money to control us just when we have Ethan to think about. The accusation stung, particularly because it was so contrary to Eleanor's history of generous, no-strings-attached support. That's not fair, and it's not true. I've given you and Vanessa over $70,000 in the past 2 years without asking a single question. And now you're keeping score? Michael's voice rose slightly before he caught himself, glancing nervously at the door. Look, forget I asked. We'll figure it out ourselves. He left before Eleanor could respond, closing the door with a decisive click that felt like the severing of trust. Eleanor sat in the silent guest room, processing what had just happened. The son who had once shared everything with her now viewed her financial concerns as a personal attack. The young man who had been meticulously responsible with money throughout college and his early career was now defensive about legitimate questions regarding significant loans. This wasn't the Michael she knew. This was someone else's version of her son. Sleep eluded Eleanor that night. She lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house, the hum of the high-end refrigerator, the occasional distant cry from Ethan quickly hushed, and once, the muffled sound of an argument from down the hallway. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone was unmistakable, Vanessa's sharp insistence and Michael's placating response. Morning brought a household already in motion by the time Eleanor emerged at 7:30. Vanessa was in the kitchen preparing what appeared to be an elaborate smoothie while simultaneously typing on her laptop. Good morning, Eleanor offered. Can I help with breakfast? Oh, we don't do formal breakfasts, Vanessa replied without looking up. There's yogurt in the fridge if you want some, or I think Michael left some granola in the pantry. Coffee's already brewed. The kitchen showed no signs of accommodating a guest, no place settings, no offered toast or fruit, not even a gesture toward where cups might be found. Eleanor found herself opening multiple cabinets before locating coffee mugs, feeling like an intruder rather than family. Where is Michael? She asked, pouring coffee into a mug that declared, Boss Babe, in flowing script. He had an early meeting with clients, Vanessa replied, finally glancing up. He said to tell you he'll be back around lunchtime. The convenient absence felt orchestrated after last night's conversation. Eleanor sipped her coffee, deciding on a direct approach. And Ethan? Is he awake? I was hoping to finally meet my grandson this morning. Something flickered across Vanessa's face, annoyance, perhaps, or calculation. He's having tummy issues this morning. The pediatrician says it's normal at this stage, but he needs calm and quiet. Maybe this afternoon would be better. Another delay, another barrier. Eleanor had traveled 3 hours and been in the house for over 12 hours without being permitted to even glimpse her grandson. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. I understand if he's not feeling well, Eleanor said carefully. But I've come specifically to meet him and help you both with the transition. If there's a reason you're uncomfortable with me seeing Ethan, I'd appreciate you being direct about it. Vanessa's pleasant mask slipped momentarily, revealing a flash of the hardness beneath. I'm being direct about his needs. Ethan is on a careful schedule that prioritizes his development and well-being. Frankly, having visitors disrupts that schedule, which is why we've limited them. I'm not a visitor, Vanessa. I'm his grandmother. And I'm his mother, Vanessa countered, her voice taking on an edge. Which means I make the decisions about what's best for him. The battle lines were clearly drawn. Eleanor considered her options, deciding that direct confrontation would only strengthen Vanessa's resistance. Instead, she nodded and changed tactics. You're absolutely right that you're the decision maker. I'm only here to support you both and meet my grandson when it's convenient. Perhaps you could suggest the best time today when that might happen? Vanessa seemed momentarily disarmed by the lack of pushback. His best time is usually after his 2 p.m. feeding. He's most alert then. Wonderful. I'll look forward to that, Eleanor said, pouring another cup of coffee and settling at the kitchen island with her phone. In the meantime, is there anything I can do to help around the house? Laundry? Meal prep? No need, Vanessa replied quickly. I have systems for everything, and it's easier to maintain them myself than explain them. Translation: Your help is neither needed nor wanted. Eleanor spent the morning making herself scarce, taking a walk around the lakeside community and observing the neighborhood dynamics. The houses were all similarly upscale, landscaping professionally maintained, luxury vehicles and circular driveways. It was a community built on appearance and status, precisely the environment that would appeal to someone like Vanessa, who clearly valued external validation. When Eleanor returned, she found Vanessa on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in hushed but intense tones. "I don't care what Michael told you," she was saying. "We need that extension." "Yes, I understand the terms, but circumstances have changed." "No, that's completely unacceptable." She ended the call abruptly when she noticed Eleanor, plastering on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just dealing with some subscription service that won't stop charging us," she explained unconvincingly. "So annoying." Eleanor nodded, though her banker's ear had recognized the cadence of a financial negotiation, not a customer service complaint. "Any sign of Michael yet?" "He texted that the meeting is running long. He'll be back by 3. Vanessa glanced at her watch with obvious calculation. "Actually, I need to run out for a few things for dinner. Ethan's napping now, but he should sleep for at least another hour. If he wakes and cries, just let me know when I get back, and I'll handle it." The instruction was clear: do not touch the baby even if he cries. Eleanor simply nodded, watching as Vanessa gathered her designer purse and keys, issuing a few more unnecessary reminders before departing. The moment Vanessa's car pulled out of the driveway, Eleanor moved swiftly toward the nursery. She wouldn't wake Ethan, but she wasn't going to miss this opportunity to at least see her grandson. The nursery door was ajar, and Eleanor pushed it open gently to reveal a magazine-worthy space, a custom crib with hand-painted details, a crystal chandelier, custom wallpaper featuring a woodland scene, and what appeared to be original artwork on the walls. The room had cost a small fortune, far more than the medical expenses Eleanor had provided funds for. But more importantly, in the center of the designer crib, wrapped in an organic bamboo swaddle, was Ethan. Eleanor approached quietly, her heart swelling at the sight of her first grandchild. He was perfect, dark lashes against round cheeks, rosebud lips, and the unmistakable Williams nose that had appeared in 4 generations. She didn't touch him, respecting his sleep, but stood watching his peaceful breathing with the wonder that only grandparents can truly understand. "Hello, Ethan," she whispered. "I'm your grandmother. I've been waiting a very long time to meet you." As if sensing her presence, Ethan's eyes fluttered open, deep blue eyes that fixed on Eleanor with that peculiar newborn intensity that seemed to see everything and nothing simultaneously. He didn't cry, just gazed up with solemn curiosity. "There you are," Eleanor murmured, reaching down to gently touch his hand with one finger. His tiny fingers reflexively closed around hers, creating an instant bond that brought tears to her eyes. "We're going to be great friends, you and I." She stood like that for several minutes, talking softly to Ethan about all the things she looked forward to sharing with him: trips to the lake, stories about his father as a boy, the family traditions that connected him to generations past. Ethan remained calm, seemingly content with this new presence. Eventually, Eleanor reluctantly withdrew, not wanting to overstimulate him or give Vanessa any reason to further restrict access. She returned to the living room and resumed her position as if she'd never moved, but with a lighter heart. She had met her grandson, even if it required a small act of rebellion. While waiting for Vanessa's return, Eleanor decided to check her email. Opening her laptop at the kitchen island, she noticed a stack of mail partially concealed beneath a decorative bowl. She wouldn't normally pry, but the corner of a familiar bank logo caught her attention, the same bank where she had previously worked as an executive. The envelope was addressed to Michael and marked "Urgent, Second Notice." Without touching it, Eleanor could see enough to recognize a collection warning. Beside it was a statement from a credit card company with a similar urgent notification. Her investigation was interrupted by the sound of Vanessa's car in the driveway. Eleanor closed her laptop and moved to the couch, picking up a magazine. As Vanessa entered with shopping bags from high-end stores. "Everything okay here?" Vanessa asked, her eyes immediately darting toward the baby monitor on the counter. "Perfectly quiet," Eleanor replied truthfully. "I was just catching up on some reading." Vanessa nodded, but her gaze shifted to the kitchen island where Eleanor's laptop sat near the mail stack. Something in her expression changed, a flash of suspicion or perhaps concern. "I'm going to check on Ethan," she said, heading upstairs without unpacking her purchases. Eleanor used the opportunity to peek inside one of the shopping bags, finding expensive baby clothes with price tags that would have funded a week of groceries. The disconnect between the urgent financial notices and the continuing luxury purchases was striking. Michael returned shortly before 3, looking tired but forcing enthusiasm. Sorry about disappearing this morning, he said, kissing Eleanor's cheek. Client emergencies wait for no one. No problem, Eleanor replied, studying her son's face. The strain around his eyes had deepened since yesterday. Everything okay with the project? Just some design revisions, he said vaguely. Nothing serious. Eleanor decided to be direct. I met Ethan while Vanessa was out shopping. He's absolutely beautiful, Michael. Her son's expression cycled through surprise, concern, and then relief too genuine to hide. You did? What did you think? He's perfect, isn't he? Completely. Perfect, Eleanor agreed. He has your father's expressions already. Michael smiled, the first unguarded smile she'd seen since arriving. I think so too. Then his expression clouded. Maybe don't mention to Vanessa that you went in while she was gone. She's very particular about Ethan's schedule and visitors. I'm not a visitor, Eleanor reminded him gently. But I understand. Michael lowered his voice. It's just easier not to challenge her systems right now. The postpartum period is really sensitive, and her therapist says maintaining control over Ethan's environment is important for her mental health. Eleanor nodded, though the explanation struck her as convenient rather than medically necessary. Before she could respond, Vanessa called down from upstairs. Michael? Ethan's awake. Can you come up? Michael excused himself, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and growing concerns. The financial red flags, Vanessa's controlling behavior, Michael's diminished confidence, and the systematic isolation from family were creating a disturbing picture. Eleanor decided to test a theory. When Michael and Vanessa finally brought Ethan downstairs for his official introduction, Eleanor acted as if it were indeed their first meeting, exclaiming appropriately over his perfect features and accepting the carefully orchestrated brief. Holding session that Vanessa supervised with hawk-like attention. Would it be all right if I took a photo with him? Eleanor asked, already anticipating the answer. Actually, we're not sharing photos of Ethan on social media or allowing others to do so until he's older, Vanessa explained with practiced concern. Digital footprints and privacy issues, you understand. Not for social media, Eleanor clarified. Just for my personal album. Even private photos have a way of getting shared, Vanessa insisted. We can send you the professional shots. Once they're fully edited. Another boundary, another exclusion. Eleanor simply nodded and returned Ethan to his mother's waiting arms, noticing how Vanessa immediately adjusted the blanket as if erasing Eleanor's touch. That evening's dinner was another performance of perfect family life. Vanessa had prepared an elaborate meal that she barely touched herself, directing most of the conversation toward superficial topics that highlighted their social connections and status in the community. Michael contributed occasional comments but mostly focused on his plate, avoiding eye contact when financial topics arose. By the way, Vanessa said casually as she served dessert, we're planning a baptism for Ethan next month. Very small. Just immediate family and a few close friends. The photographer is the same one who did the royal family's portraits last year. We were lucky to get her. That sounds lovely, Eleanor replied. I'd be happy to help with arrangements. Oh, it's all taken care of, Vanessa said quickly. We have a professional handling everything. The only thing we need to finalize is the godparents. Eleanor waited for the natural inclusion of family in this role, but Vanessa continued, we're thinking of asking Michael's firm partner James and his wife. They have such excellent connections in the community, and their children attend the preparatory academy where we hope to enroll Ethan eventually. The deliberate exclusion of Catherine or Eleanor's youngest son Thomas was unmistakable. Michael looked uncomfortable but offered no objection. Speaking of family, Eleanor said, Catherine was hoping to visit this weekend to meet Ethan as well. Would that timing work? The tension that immediately filled the room was palpable. Vanessa's smile became fixed, and Michael began fidgeting with his napkin. This weekend isn't good, Vanessa said firmly. We have the photographer coming for more newborn shots on Saturday, and Sunday we have brunch with the country club membership committee. Besides, it's really too soon for Ethan to be exposed to multiple visitors. His immune system is still developing. Catherine is hardly multiple visitors, Eleanor pointed out. She's his aunt. Perhaps next month would be better, Vanessa suggested in a tone that ended the discussion. After Ethan has had more of his vaccinations. After dinner, Eleanor retreated to the guest room, texting Catherine an update on the situation. She included a surreptitiously taken photo of Ethan during a moment when Vanessa had stepped away, knowing her daughter would understand the need for discretion. That bad, huh? Catherine texted back. What's her endgame here? Complete isolation. From the Williams family while bleeding you dry financially? That's my growing concern, Eleanor replied. I'm going to do some digging tomorrow. Her opportunity came unexpectedly the next morning. Vanessa announced at breakfast that she had a doctor's appointment, and Michael needed to stop by his office afterward to pick up some files. Ethan will be napping, so you'll have some quiet time to yourself, Vanessa explained, the implication clear that Eleanor was not to disturb the baby. Once they departed, Eleanor moved quickly. Her decades in banking had taught her how to efficiently assess financial situations, and she had concerns that went beyond normal new parent expenses. In the home office adjacent to the living room, she found what she was looking for, a stack of bills carelessly shoved into a desk drawer, multiple past due notices, and credit card statements showing balances well into six figures across multiple accounts. Most concerning was a notice of pending foreclosure proceedings that had been opened but hastily stuffed behind other papers. The document revealed that Michael and Vanessa had missed 4 mortgage payments despite Eleanor's emergency contributions. During that same period, a methodical search of other documents revealed the truth Eleanor had suspected. Her financial assistance had not been going toward medical expenses or home repairs but toward maintaining an unsustainable lifestyle, built on appearance and status. Designer clothing, country club memberships, luxury vacations documented in credit card statements, and even cosmetic procedures listed in a medical financing agreement. Most disturbing of all was a bank statement showing that the $12,000 Eleanor had provided for Ethan's medical expenses had been transferred directly to a plastic surgeon's office the day after it was received. The date matched perfectly with Vanessa's suddenly enhanced appearance at Ethan's birth, not the result of good genes, as she had claimed, but of cosmetic procedures funded by Eleanor under false pretenses. The picture was becoming clear. Vanessa had systematically isolated Michael from his family's influence while simultaneously extracting financial support under false pretenses. Eleanor's presence threatened that arrangement, potentially exposing the deception and challenging Vanessa's complete control over Michael and now Ethan. Eleanor carefully replaced everything as she had found it, her mind racing with implications and possible approaches. The situation was worse than she had imagined, not just controlling behavior, but financial exploitation and deliberate deception. Her son and grandson were in a household built on lies and teetering on financial collapse. As she sat processing this information, Eleanor heard Ethan's cry through the baby monitor. Without hesitation, she went to him, finding him awake and hungry in his crib. Years of motherhood returned instantly as she lifted him, cradling him against her shoulder and speaking softly as she carried him downstairs to prepare one of the pre-made bottles she had seen in the refrigerator. Ethan quieted almost immediately in her arms, his tiny body relaxing against her experienced hold. Eleanor sat in the rocking chair, feeding him while softly singing the same lullabies she had once sung to Michael. It was a moment of pure connection. Grandmother and grandson finding each other despite the barriers erected between them. She was so absorbed in this precious interaction that she didn't hear the front door open. The first indication of Vanessa's return was her sharp intake of breath from the doorway. "What are you doing?" Vanessa demanded, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I told you not to disturb him." Eleanor looked up calmly, continuing to hold Ethan securely. "He was crying. He was hungry. I fed him." "That's not your decision to make," Vanessa snapped, striding forward to take Ethan from Eleanor's arms. "He's on a feeding schedule. You've completely disrupted his routine." "He's a baby, Vanessa, not a scientific experiment," Eleanor replied, her patience finally wearing thin. "Babies cry when they need something. They've been doing it that way for thousands of years." Vanessa's face flushed with anger as she clutched Ethan possessively against her chest. "This isn't a hotel where you can just do whatever you want. This is my home, my rules." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unmistakable in their meaning. Eleanor stood slowly, smoothing her slacks with hands that had negotiated billion-dollar deals and raised 3 successful children. "I see," she said, her voice calm despite the storm building inside her. "Thank you for clarifying my position in your household." Michael appeared in the doorway, his expression cycling through confusion to alarm as he read the tension in the room. "What's going on?" "Your mother took it upon herself to feed Ethan without permission," Vanessa snapped. "She deliberately ignored everything I explained about his schedule." Michael looked trapped between loyalty to his wife and respect for his mother. "Mom, we did discuss following Vanessa's system." "Your son was hungry, Michael," Eleanor replied simply. "When babies cry because they're hungry, they get fed. That's not a system. That's basic care." "You have no idea what you've done," Vanessa continued, bouncing Ethan with movements that seemed more agitated than soothing. "Now he'll expect feeding whenever he cries instead of learning to wait for the appropriate time. Do you have any idea how hard we've worked to establish this routine?" Eleanor met her daughter-in-law's gaze directly. I've raised 3 children who grew into kind, successful adults. I've fed countless babies in my lifetime. What I haven't done is stand by while a hungry child cries because his needs don't fit a schedule in someone's parenting book." The room fell silent except for Ethan's small sounds against Vanessa's shoulder. Michael shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between the women in his life. "Perhaps," Eleanor continued evenly, "it would be best if I returned to Birmingham. I came to help and meet my grandson, but it's clear my presence is causing more stress than support." "Mom, no," Michael began, but Vanessa cut him off. "If you think that's best," she said, her voice artificially pleasant now that she was getting her way. "We do appreciate you coming, but you're right that Ethan's first weeks are a sensitive time for establishing routines." Eleanor nodded, her decision crystallizing. "I'll pack my things." As she climbed the stairs to the guest room, Eleanor heard the hushed but intense conversation erupting between Michael and Vanessa below. Their voices rose and fell, with Vanessa's sharp tones dominating and Michael's responses growing increasingly defensive. In the guest room, Eleanor moved methodically, packing her belongings while formulating a plan. This wasn't a retreat, it was a strategic withdrawal to reassess and approach the situation differently. The financial discoveries and Vanessa's extreme controlling behavior required careful handling, not emotional reactions. Her phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Seriously? She's kicking you out for feeding a hungry baby?" "Not exactly," Eleanor replied. "But it's time for a different approach. Call me in an hour." As Eleanor zipped her suitcase, a soft knock came at the door. Michael entered, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and distress. "Mom, you don't have to leave. Vanessa's just overwhelmed and protective." Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, patting the space beside her. "Sit with me a moment." Michael joined her reluctantly, his posture reflecting his internal conflict. "Do you remember when you were 12 and Thomas Stewart bullied you at school?" Eleanor asked. Michael nodded, confusion crossing his face at this unexpected turn. "You came home with a black eye, and do you remember what I told you? That sometimes walking away isn't the same as giving up," Michael recalled. "That strategic retreat can be smarter than fighting the wrong battle at the wrong time." "Exactly," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "I'm not leaving because I'm angry or hurt, though I am both of those things. I'm leaving because this approach isn't working, and everyone is suffering for it, you, me, and most importantly, Ethan." Michael's shoulders slumped. "I don't know how we got here, Mom. Everything's so complicated now." "Including your finances?" Eleanor asked gently. His head snapped up, alarm flashing across his face. "What do you mean?" "Michael, I raised you. I know when something's wrong, and I know when you're keeping secrets out of shame or fear. The foreclosure notice in your desk drawer isn't something you can hide forever." Color drained from her son's face. "You went through our papers? I noticed the past due notices in your mail yesterday. As someone who loves you and has been providing significant financial support, I had concerns." Eleanor kept her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "The real question is why you didn't come to me honestly about the situation instead of creating these emergencies that somehow always coincide with luxury purchases." Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his teenage years when caught in a difficult situation. "It's not what you think. Vanessa has a very specific vision for our life, for Ethan's future. The right schools, the right connections. The right appearance," Eleanor finished for him. "Even at the cost of actual financial security." "She grew up with nothing," Michael said defensively. "Her childhood was unstable. She wants better for Ethan." "And that's admirable," Eleanor agreed. "But building a foundation on debt and deception isn't security, it's a house of cards. What happens when it collapses? What happens to Ethan then?" Michael had no answer, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I'm not judging you," Eleanor continued softly. "But I am concerned. The Michael I raised was honest and responsible. He didn't hide foreclosure notices or mislead his mother about where emergency money was going. I wanted to tell you," he whispered. "But Vanessa said you wouldn't understand, that you'd use it to control us or make us live by your standards." The manipulation was so transparent it broke Eleanor's heart. "Have I ever done that before? In 35 years, have I ever used money to control you or your choices?" "No," Michael admitted. "But things are different now. I have Vanessa and Ethan to consider. And that's why I'm leaving today instead of forcing a confrontation that would only make things worse." Eleanor stood, lifting her suitcase. "But this conversation isn't over, Michael. It's just beginning in a different way." Downstairs, Vanessa waited near the front door, Ethan nowhere in sight. Her smile was triumphant but carefully masked as concern. "I'm sorry things didn't work out as planned," she said with practiced diplomacy. Perhaps when Ethan is a bit older, visits will be easier. Perhaps, Eleanor agreed mildly. Though I think we all need to be more honest about what's really happening here. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. I think you do, Eleanor replied. But that's a conversation for another day. For now, I'll say goodbye and thank you for your hospitality, limited though it was. Michael carried her suitcase to the car, his movements heavy with unspoken regret. I'll call you tonight, he promised as he hugged her goodbye. I'm counting on it, Eleanor responded, holding him a moment longer than usual. Remember who you are, Michael. Not who someone else wants you to be. As Eleanor drove away from the lakeside community, she didn't feel defeated. She felt focused in a way she hadn't experienced since her executive days when facing a particularly challenging acquisition. The battle for her grandson and son wasn't over, it had merely shifted to terrain where she had the advantage. Halfway back to Birmingham, Eleanor pulled into a rest stop and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Catherine, explaining what had happened and what she now knew about Michael and Vanessa's situation. So what's the plan? Catherine asked. Because I know you have one. You've got that tone in your voice. First, I need complete clarity on their financial situation, Eleanor explained. Then we approach this as we would any other intervention, with facts, compassion, and firm boundaries. Her second call was to her youngest son Thomas, an attorney specializing in family and financial law. She outlined what she had discovered and her concerns about the ongoing deception. From what you're describing, this is financial abuse coupled with isolation tactics, Thomas said, his professional assessment matching Eleanor's instincts. The question is whether Michael recognizes it yet. He's beginning to, Eleanor replied. But he's caught between fear of Vanessa's reaction and shame about the financial reality. Document everything, Thomas advised. Dates, amounts, what was claimed versus what the money was used for. We may need it later, especially if this escalates. Her final call was to her longtime friend and financial advisor, Rachel Winters. I need to make some immediate changes to my accounts, Eleanor explained. And I could use your professional insight on a complex situation. That evening, as promised, Michael called. His voice was subdued, the background suspiciously quiet, suggesting he was calling from outside the house. Vanessa's still upset, he began without preamble. She says you deliberately undermined her parenting choices. By feeding a hungry baby? Eleanor kept her tone light. You know it's more than that, Michael sighed. It's about respecting her authority as Ethan's mother. And what about respecting your role as his father? Eleanor asked. Or my role as his grandmother? Family isn't a hierarchy, Michael. It's a support system. The silence that followed told Eleanor more than words could have. Her son was wrestling with truths he wasn't ready to face. Look, she continued gently, I didn't leave today because I was giving up or accepting Vanessa's version of family. I left because some situations need to be addressed from a position of strength, not emotion. What does that mean? It means I'm making some changes, Eleanor explained. Starting with our financial relationship. I've transferred money to cover your mortgage arrears directly to the bank. The foreclosure proceedings will be halted, but there won't be any more direct cash transfers to your joint account. Michael's intake of breath was sharp. Mom, that's... I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything yet. Just listen. Eleanor's voice took on the quiet authority that had served her well through decades in banking. I've also arranged to pay Ethan's future educational expenses through a trust that cannot be accessed for any other purpose. My grandson will have every opportunity, but those funds can't be redirected to lifestyle choices. Vanessa won't like this, Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. Probably not, Eleanor agreed. Which tells you something important. About her priorities. Another long silence followed. What about the loan I asked for? Michael finally asked. Instead of a loan, I'm offering something more valuable, professional financial counseling with Rachel Winters, who helped your father and me build our retirement security. She's expecting your call. Vanessa will see this as you controlling us through money, Michael protested weakly. And I see Vanessa controlling you through isolation and shame, Eleanor countered. The difference is that I'm being transparent about my concerns and my boundaries. That night, Eleanor slept in her own bed for the first time in 3 days, the familiar comfort of home a stark contrast to the sterile guest room where she'd been quarantined from family life. But her mind remained active, processing what she had learned and planning her next steps. By morning, she had outlined a comprehensive approach that drew on both her maternal instincts and her professional expertise. This wasn't just about protecting her financial resources from exploitation, it was about breaking a cycle of control that threatened to destroy her son's confidence and limit her grandson's relationship with his extended family. Over the next week, Eleanor waited patiently while implementing her plan. She documented every financial transaction between herself and Michael's household. For the past 2 years, she consulted with Thomas about legal protections for Ethan's future. She arranged for Catherine to be named co-trustee on Ethan's educational fund. And she waited for the inevitable fallout once Vanessa discovered the changed financial landscape. It came on Saturday morning, a series of increasingly frantic texts from Michael about a declined credit card at the country club, followed by a call from Vanessa herself. "What have you done?" Vanessa demanded without greeting, her voice tight with fury. "Good morning to you too, Vanessa," Eleanor replied calmly. "I assume you're calling about the credit card Michael added me to as an authorized user last year? You had no right to cancel it." Vanessa's voice rose sharply. "We were in the middle of brunch with the membership committee. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" "I can imagine," Eleanor said. "Almost as embarrassing as discovering. The card I provided for emergency family expenses was being used for country club dues, spa treatments, and designer boutiques while your mortgage went unpaid." The silence that followed was thick with shock. Vanessa hadn't expected Eleanor to know the details of their spending or to take such direct action. "That card was for Ethan's needs," Eleanor continued. "Not for maintaining appearances at the expense of actual financial stability." "You have no idea what Ethan needs," Vanessa hissed. "A secure social position, the right connections, a home that isn't in foreclosure might be a good start," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Along with parents who aren't crushed under mounting debt. This is none of your business." "It became my business when you used my grandson's supposed medical needs to finance your lifestyle," Eleanor replied, her voice firm but not unkind. "It became my business when you began isolating my son from his family while simultaneously depending on our financial support." "Michael!" Vanessa shouted, apparently turning from the phone. "Your mother is accusing me of using your family for money. Are you going to let her talk to me like this?" Eleanor waited, heart pounding, for her son's response. This was the critical moment. Would Michael continue enabling Vanessa's behavior? Or would he finally acknowledge the reality of their situation? When Michael's voice came on the line, it was quieter than Eleanor had expected, but steadier too. "Mom's right, Vanessa. We've been living beyond our means and hiding it from everyone, including ourselves. The foreclosure notice wasn't a mistake. Or a bank error like you told me. We're 3 months from losing our home." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, relief washing through her. The first step toward healing was acknowledging the problem. "So what, now you're both ganging up on me?" Vanessa's voice cracked slightly, the first genuine emotion Eleanor had heard from her. "After everything I've done to create the perfect home, the perfect life for our family?" "No one is ganging up on you," Eleanor said. "We're acknowledging a difficult reality so we can address it together, as a family." "This isn't what family does," Vanessa insisted. "Family supports each other unconditionally." "No," Eleanor corrected gently. "That's what enablers do. Family tells you the truth even when it's painful. Family offers help that actually helps, not just maintains destructive patterns." "We don't need your kind of help," Vanessa spat. "We'll figure this out ourselves." "With what resources?" Michael asked, his voice gaining strength. "We're maxed out on every credit card. My business line of credit is tapped. Your parents can barely support themselves, let alone help us. Mom is offering us a lifeline, Vanessa. With strings attached." "With reality attached," Eleanor countered. "The reality that continuing on this path leads to bankruptcy, foreclosure, and the destruction of the security you claim to want for Ethan." The conversation continued in circles, with Vanessa alternating between angry accusations and tearful declarations about her intentions for Ethan's future. Throughout, Eleanor maintained her calm, reminding herself that Vanessa's reaction came from fear of losing control, fear of admitting failure, fear of returning to the poverty she'd worked so hard to escape. Finally, when Vanessa's arguments began to repeat themselves, Eleanor took a different approach. "Vanessa, do you remember telling me that this isn't a hotel?" she asked quietly. "What does that have to do with anything?" "You were right," Eleanor continued. "Your home isn't a hotel. But neither is my bank account an ATM, my grandson a possession to be controlled, or my son an accessory to the life you're trying to project. We're all people with needs, feelings, and voices that deserve respect." The silence that followed stretched so long that Eleanor checked to see if the call had dropped. Finally, Michael's voice returned. "Mom, I need to call you back. We need to talk about this privately first." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. "I'm here when you're ready." After ending the call, Eleanor sat in her garden, the familiar surroundings grounding her amid the emotional storm. She had taken a calculated risk by confronting the situation so directly, but continuing to enable Vanessa's behavior would only lead to greater harm for everyone involved, especially Ethan. Catherine called an hour later, her voice vibrating with excitement. Michael just texted me. He and Vanessa had a come-to-Jesus conversation, and he's standing his ground about getting financial counseling. He even asked if I'd be willing to come up next weekend to see Ethan. Eleanor smiled, the first piece of her plan falling into place. What did you tell him? That I've already booked a hotel room in case the guest room is unavailable, Catherine laughed. But seriously, Mom, whatever you said must have made an impact. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is establish clear boundaries, Eleanor replied, even when it feels harsh in the moment. 3 days passed without further contact from Michael or Vanessa. Eleanor used the time to consult with Rachel about specific financial strategies that might help the young family stabilize, without enabling their problematic patterns. She also spoke with Thomas about legal protections for any future financial support she might provide. On the 4th day, Michael called. His voice sounded different, steadier, more reminiscent of the confident young man he'd been before Vanessa's influence had diminished him. Mom, we need to talk. Can you come back up to the lake this weekend? Eleanor hesitated, unwilling to re-enter the tense environment without clear parameters. I think we should meet on neutral ground. There's a cafe in Alexander City that makes excellent sandwiches. We could meet there for lunch on Saturday. Michael agreed, and that Saturday, Eleanor arrived at the cafe early, selecting a quiet table on the patio where they could speak privately. She spotted Michael's car pulling into the lot, but was surprised to see him emerge alone, without Vanessa or Ethan. Just me today, he explained as he sat across from her. Vanessa and I agreed this conversation needed to happen between us first. Eleanor nodded, studying her son's face. The strain was still visible in the shadows beneath his eyes, but there was something else too, a determination she hadn't seen in years. I've spent the last few days looking at our finances, Michael began. Really looking at them, not just avoiding the statements like I've been doing. It's worse than I thought. Financial reality often is, Eleanor said gently. Vanessa and I had some difficult conversations. Very difficult. Michael took a deep breath. She admitted that she's been hiding bills from me, opening credit accounts I didn't know about, and using the money you sent for completely different purposes than what we told you. I suspected as much, Eleanor acknowledged. The question is, where do we go from here? Michael straightened his shoulders. We've made some decisions. First, we're selling the house. It's way more than we need, and the mortgage is killing us. Second, I've contacted Rachel and scheduled our first session for next week. Third, Vanessa has agreed to speak with a therapist about her spending and her control issues. Eleanor reached across the table to squeeze her son's hand. Those are brave decisions, Michael. There's more, he continued. Vanessa's agreed that family relationships are non-negotiable. That means regular visits with you, Catherine, and Thomas. No more excuses about schedules or immune systems. Ethan deserves to know his family. The weight that had settled in Eleanor's chest since her abrupt departure began to lift. This was the son she knew, thoughtful, responsible, and courageous. When it mattered most. What changed, she asked. Michael's expression grew somber. After you canceled the credit card, Vanessa was furious. She demanded that I call you and insist you reinstate it immediately. When I refused, she threatened to take Ethan and go stay with her cousin in Atlanta until I fixed the situation. Eleanor's breath caught. She threatened to take Ethan away from you? Michael nodded. That was the moment everything became clear. I realized she'd been using Ethan as leverage against me just like she'd been using financial shame to isolate me from you and the rest of the family. When I stood firm, she broke down completely. And that led to these decisions? Eventually, Michael admitted. After a lot of tears and accusations. But once she calmed down, we had the most honest conversation of our entire relationship. About her childhood poverty, about her fear of being seen as not good enough, about the image she's been trying to maintain at any cost. Eleanor listened. Her heart aching for both of them, for Michael's belated awakening and for Vanessa's desperate need to escape her past through external validation. It's going to be a long road, Michael concluded. We have a lot of debt to address, a lot of patterns to change. But for the first time, I feel like we're actually working together instead of me just trying to keep the peace at any cost. And what do you need from me? Eleanor asked. Honesty, Michael replied immediately. The kind you've always given me, even when it was hard to hear. And patience. Vanessa is trying, but this won't change overnight. I can provide both. Eleanor promised. Along with my love, which has never wavered, even during the difficult moments. As they finished lunch, Michael brought up one more topic. There's something else we need to discuss. Vanessa and I want you to be Ethan's godmother. At his baptism next month. Not as a financial guarantor or because of your connections, but because you're his grandmother and you've shown us what real love looks like, the kind that tells hard truths and sets boundaries when necessary. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. I would be honored. When Eleanor returned home that evening, she sat in her garden watching the sunset with a lighter heart. The situation wasn't magically resolved, there would be setbacks, resistance, and difficult conversations ahead. But the first steps toward healing had been taken. Her phone chimed with a text from Michael, a photo of Ethan smiling in his crib, wearing the family christening gown Eleanor had preserved for 3 generations. The caption read, "Trying this on for next month. Vanessa says it's perfect. We both think you should keep it at your house so it's ready for Catherine's future children too." It was a small gesture, but symbolically significant, an acknowledgement. That family treasures belonged to the entire family, not under the exclusive control of any one member. More importantly, it represented Vanessa's first willing step toward integration rather than isolation. Eleanor texted back a simple heart emoji, then called Catherine to update her on the developments. "It's just the beginning," she cautioned. "There will be challenges ahead." "Of course there will," Catherine agreed. "But you've broken through the wall she built around Michael and Ethan. That's what matters most." As Eleanor prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the power of standing firm with love, not capitulating to avoid conflict, not attacking in retaliation, but calmly establishing boundaries that protected what mattered most. She had risked her relationship with her son by confronting uncomfortable truths, but in doing so, had created space for authentic healing to begin. The journey ahead would require patience, consistency, and continued courage from everyone involved. But Eleanor Williams hadn't spent 72 years backing down from important challenges, and she wasn't about to start now, not when her grandson's future and her son's well-being hung in the balance. Tomorrow, she would call her financial advisor again. There would be no more blank checks or unquestioned emergency transfers, but there would be structured support for Michael and Vanessa's journey toward financial health. There would be regular visits with Ethan, family traditions honored, and relationships restored not through forced harmony but through honest communication. Eleanor smiled as she set her alarm, feeling more like the banking executive who had navigated complex negotiations than the grandmother who had been dismissed from her own family. Sometimes love required strategic thinking, and sometimes the most loving action wasn't the most immediately pleasant one. But at 72, Eleanor Williams knew one thing with absolute certainty: family was worth fighting for, even when the fight looked different than expected. And in this particular battle, she had finally gained the foothold needed to move forward together. The autumn leaves blazed in vibrant oranges and reds as Eleanor drove toward Lake Martin the following weekend. Catherine chatted animatedly from the passenger seat, scrolling through photos on her phone. "I still can't believe Vanessa actually invited both of us," Catherine marveled. "Do you think she's been body snatched by aliens?" Eleanor chuckled, navigating the winding lakeside road. "Let's give her credit for trying. Change isn't easy, especially when it challenges deeply ingrained patterns." "I'll believe it when I see it," Catherine replied skeptically. "One weekend of playing nice doesn't erase months of treating you like an unwelcome intruder." "True. Transformation happens in small steps," Eleanor said, tapping the brakes as a deer bounded across the road ahead. "When you've built your entire identity around control and appearances, letting go is terrifying." The landscape opened up to reveal Michael and Vanessa's Colonial home, still impressive but somehow different with the "for sale" sign prominently displayed in the front yard. Eleanor felt a surge of pride in her son's follow-through on his commitment to financial responsibility. As they pulled into the driveway, the front door opened. Eleanor braced herself for Vanessa's practiced perfect hostess performance, but was surprised to see Michael emerge holding Ethan, with Vanessa slightly behind him looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "They're here," Michael called over his shoulder before striding down the steps to meet them. Without preamble, he placed Ethan in Eleanor's arms. "Someone's been waiting to see his grandmother." The simple gesture, offering Ethan immediately, without hesitation or hovering supervision, spoke volumes about the shifts occurring in their family dynamic. Eleanor cradled her grandson, drinking in his sweet baby scent and the new awareness in his eyes as he studied her face. "Hello, my darling boy," she murmured. "Grandmother's missed you." Catherine crowded close, cooing over her nephew while Michael retrieved their overnight bags from the trunk. Vanessa remained on the porch, her body language hesitant but her smile more genuine than Eleanor had ever seen it. "Welcome," Vanessa said as they approached, her voice lacking its usual polish. "We've been looking forward to your visit." The sincerity in her tone caught Eleanor off guard. She had expected polite compliance with the new family expectations, not what appeared to be genuine welcome. "Thank you for having us," Eleanor replied, matching Vanessa's sincerity as she carried Ethan into the house. The interior had changed subtly since Eleanor's abrupt departure 3 weeks earlier. Some of the more ostentatious decorative items were missing, and family photos now included several of Michael's childhood that Eleanor recognized from her own albums. Most significantly, the atmosphere felt less like a showroom and more like a home, slightly messier, more lived in, with evidence of Ethan's presence throughout the main living areas rather than hidden away. "We've made some changes," Michael explained, gesturing toward the dining room where moving boxes were stacked neatly against one wall. "Starting to pack non-essentials for the move. We found a smaller place closer to my office, a rental until we sort out our finances." "Downsizing is smart," Eleanor approved. "You're eliminating your largest expense while giving yourselves breathing room to rebuild." Vanessa appeared with a tray of coffee mugs. "Rachel says we should be debt-free within 18 months if we stick to the plan." She set the tray down, her movements less precise than before. "It's humbling to realize how far off track we got." The admission clearly cost her, and Eleanor acknowledged it with a respectful nod. Financial rehabilitation is like any other recovery, the first step is recognizing there's a problem. They settled in the living room, Ethan contentedly snuggled in Eleanor's arms while Catherine unpacked gifts, practical items like developmental toys and comfortable onesies rather than the designer baby clothes that had previously filled Ethan's closet. "I have something to show you," Vanessa said, disappearing briefly before returning with a thick binder. She handed it to Eleanor with evident discomfort. "This is everything, all the credit card statements, loan documents, past due notices. Michael and I have been organizing it for our sessions with Rachel." Eleanor balanced Ethan carefully as she accepted the binder, understanding the significance of this transparent gesture. Inside, meticulously tabbed sections detailed the full extent of their financial distress, over $175,000 in credit card debt, the threatened home foreclosure, personal loans from colleagues, and even a list of Eleanor's contributions with notes indicating what each amount had actually been used for versus what had been claimed. "This couldn't have been easy to compile," Eleanor observed, meeting Vanessa's eyes directly. "It was humiliating," Vanessa admitted, her perfect facade cracking to reveal genuine emotion. "Seeing it all laid out like that, the lies, the manipulation. I keep thinking about what kind of example I was setting for Ethan." Michael moved to sit beside his wife, his hand covering hers in quiet support. "We both made these choices. I could have spoken up sooner instead of going along to keep the peace." The accountability from both of them, Vanessa for her deception and Michael for his enabling, was more than Eleanor had dared hope for so soon. This wasn't performance or compliance, this was the painful, necessary work of confronting hard truths. "What matters now is the path forward," Eleanor said, handing the binder back. "You've taken the first steps, which are always the hardest." The afternoon unfolded with a naturalness that had been entirely absent during Eleanor's previous visit. Catherine and Vanessa discovered a shared interest in historical documentaries, leading to animated discussion about a recent series on the civil rights movement. Michael gave Eleanor a tour of the garden, pointing out the vegetables he'd started growing to supplement their new economical meal planning. "Vanessa's been amazing, Mom," he confided as they inspected a promising row of fall greens. Once she committed to change, she approached it with the same intensity she used to direct toward appearances. She's coupon cutting, meal planning, selling designer items online, all while working with her therapist on the underlying issues. "That's her strength," Eleanor observed. "When Vanessa commits to something, she gives it her all." The challenge was redirecting that energy toward authentic priorities rather than external validation. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "The therapist says her childhood poverty created such profound insecurity that she built her entire adult identity around never appearing less than again. The spending wasn't just materialism, it was armor against feeling worthless." The insight revealed a compassion in Michael that Eleanor was relieved to see returning. Not blindly enabling Vanessa's destructive behavior, but understanding its roots while supporting healthier choices. "And how are you doing with all of this?" Eleanor asked, noting the new steadiness in her son's demeanor. "Honestly? It's both harder and easier than I expected," Michael replied. "Harder because we're confronting years of financial mistakes and relationship patterns. Easier because there's such relief in finally being honest, with you, with each other, with ourselves." Eleanor squeezed his arm gently. "That honesty is the foundation everything else will build upon." Inside, they found Vanessa giving Catherine a tour of Ethan's nursery, which had been simplified significantly. Gone were many of the extravagant furnishings, replaced by practical, quality items that would grow with him. "We're selling the Designer crib and using the money to start Ethan's college fund, Vanessa explained, a hint of her old defensiveness flashing briefly. The financial advisor suggested we match whatever we make from selling luxury items with our own contributions. Smart strategy, Eleanor approved. It transforms past excess into future security. As evening approached, Vanessa suggested they all prepare dinner together rather than ordering in, as had been her preference during Eleanor's previous visit. The kitchen became a hub of collaborative activity, Catherine chopping vegetables, Michael manning the grill, Eleanor showing Vanessa how to make her famous cornbread from scratch. My mother never cooked, Vanessa admitted as she measured ingredients under Eleanor's guidance. We lived on fast food and whatever was cheapest at the grocery store. I never learned basic kitchen skills. Well, you're learning now, Eleanor encouraged. And Ethan will grow up with homemade family meals as his normal. Vanessa's hands stilled momentarily. That's what I want for him, normal. Not the artificial perfection I've been chasing. The simple statement revealed more about Vanessa's evolving priorities than any elaborate declaration could have. She was beginning to see value in authenticity rather than appearance. Dinner was served on everyday dishes instead of the formal china Vanessa had previously insisted upon. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by Ethan's occasional happy sounds from his nearby bassinet. When Michael proposed a toast, raising his water glass since they'd eliminated alcohol as an unnecessary expense, Eleanor was struck by the genuine warmth in the room. To family, Michael said simply. The kind that tells hard truths and stays. Anyway. Later that evening, after Ethan had been put down for the night, Vanessa approached Eleanor on the back patio where she'd stepped out to enjoy the crisp autumn air. Can we talk? Vanessa asked, her voice lacking its usual polish. Of course, Eleanor gestured to the chair beside her. Beautiful night, isn't it? Vanessa sat, fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater, a far cry from the perfectly composed woman who had greeted Eleanor on her previous visit. I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually. I'm listening, Eleanor said gently. When I met Michael, I saw him as my ticket to everything I'd been denied growing up, Vanessa began, her words coming in halting bursts rather than her usual calculated speech. Not just financial security, but social acceptance. The kind of family history I never had. I was so determined to reinvent myself that I treated his family, you, as a threat rather than a blessing. Eleanor nodded, allowing Vanessa the space to continue her difficult confession. The way I treated you was inexcusable, Vanessa continued. Using Ethan to manipulate you, lying about finances, isolating Michael from his family. My therapist calls it protective narcissism, behaviors that developed to protect me from childhood vulnerability but became destructive patterns. Understanding the roots doesn't excuse the behavior, Eleanor said carefully, but it does provide a foundation for change. That's what I'm trying to do now, change. Not just the surface things like selling the house and cutting expenses, but the deeper patterns. Vanessa's voice cracked slightly. Do you think it's possible? To become someone different than who you've been? The vulnerability in the question struck Eleanor deeply. Beneath Vanessa's controlling behavior and materialistic focus had always been this frightened young woman, terrified of returning to the poverty and powerlessness of her childhood. I don't think we become someone different, Eleanor replied thoughtfully. I think we become more authentically ourselves when we shed the protective armor that's no longer serving us. Vanessa considered this, gazing out at the darkened lake. My whole life has been about becoming someone else, someone better than the trailer park girl with secondhand clothes and free school lunches. I'm not sure I even know who I am without all that striving. That's the journey you're on now, Eleanor said. And it's one of the most courageous things a person can do, facing yourself honestly without the masks and defenses. I'm afraid, Vanessa admitted, the simple statement perhaps the most genuine thing she'd ever shared with Eleanor. What if Michael realizes I'm not the woman he thought he married? What if I can't maintain these changes? Change isn't a destination, it's a daily choice, Eleanor told her. And authentic relationships survive because of honesty, not perfection. The question isn't whether you'll struggle, you will. The question is whether you'll struggle honestly, with the support of people who love you. Tears filled Vanessa's eyes. Why are you being so kind to me after everything I've done? Because I recognize something in you that reminds me of myself at a different stage of life, Eleanor replied. The desperate need to prove your worth, to ensure you're never vulnerable again. I chose different methods, but the drive came from a similar place. You? Vanessa looked genuinely surprised. But you're so, together? So confident in who you are. Eleanor laughed softly. I'm 72 years old, Vanessa. I've had decades to learn these lessons. At your age, I was driving myself to exhaustion trying to prove I belonged in the banking world, working 60-hour weeks while raising 3 children, never allowing myself to show a moment's weakness. What changed? Life has a way of teaching us what matters, Eleanor said. For me, it was my husband's heart attack when Michael was 15. Richard survived, but watching him come so close to death clarified everything. All the striving, the status seeking, the external validation, none of it meant anything compared to the people I loved. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. When I saw you holding Ethan that day, feeding him when he was hungry instead of following my rigid schedule, I was furious. But part of me also felt relieved. Like maybe all the rules and systems I'd created weren't actually necessary. Like maybe he would be okay without my constant control. He will be more than okay, Eleanor assured her. Especially with parents who are willing to grow and change for his benefit. And a grandmother who wouldn't let us get away with pushing her out of his life, Vanessa added with the first genuine smile Eleanor had seen from her. The conversation marked a turning point that Eleanor could never have anticipated 3 weeks earlier when she'd driven away from the house feeling defeated. Vanessa wasn't transformed overnight, her insecurities and controlling tendencies would require ongoing work, but she had taken the crucial first step of honest self-reflection. The following morning brought another surprise. As Eleanor was helping prepare breakfast, Michael approached with a folder containing legal documents. "What's this?" Eleanor asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "The paperwork for Ethan's educational trust," Michael explained. "We've added some provisions based on Thomas's recommendations. Vanessa and I both wanted you to review them." Eleanor opened the folder, scanning the documents with her experienced banker's eye. "I appreciate you both taking this so seriously. We're trying to rebuild trust," Michael said simply. "In all directions." When Catherine joined them, carrying Ethan who was freshly changed and dressed in one of the practical outfits she'd brought, Vanessa did something unprecedented. She asked Catherine if she'd like to give Ethan his morning bottle. "Really?" Catherine's surprise was evident. "I'd love to." "You're his aunt," Vanessa said, her tone softer than Eleanor had ever heard. He should know you just as well as he knows us." The simple acknowledgement of Catherine's importance in Ethan's life moved Eleanor deeply. This wasn't compliance with new expectations, this was genuine recognition of family bonds. After breakfast, Michael suggested they all visit the smaller house they were planning to rent, a charming lakeside cottage with a fraction of their current mortgage payment. As they toured the modest but comfortable space, Eleanor noticed Vanessa pointing out practical features rather than aesthetic showpieces. "The kitchen has great natural light for growing herbs," she noted. "And the backyard is perfect for Ethan to play when he's older. The schools in this district are excellent too, public schools with strong academic records." The mention of public schools rather than exclusive private academies represented another significant shift in Vanessa's priorities. She was beginning to value substance over status, a fundamental transformation in her worldview. On the drive back to Michael's house, Eleanor received a text from Rachel, her financial advisor, just got off the phone with Michael and Vanessa. They've committed to their financial recovery plan 100%. Most clients take months to reach this level of commitment. Whatever you did worked. Eleanor smiled, tucking her phone away. What she'd done wasn't manipulation or control, it was standing firmly in her truth while offering a path forward with dignity intact for everyone involved. That afternoon, as they prepared for Eleanor and Catherine's departure, Michael presented his mother with a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Eleanor asked, carefully opening the simple brown paper. "Just a small thank you," Michael replied, watching as she revealed a framed photograph of 4 generations of their family, Eleanor's mother holding infant Michael, Eleanor beside them, and now Michael holding Ethan in the same pose. The modern photo had been carefully edited to match the sepia tones of the original, creating a powerful visual connection across time. "This is precious," Eleanor breathed, tracing the images with her fingertip. "Where did you find the original?" "In the family albums you've kept all these years," Michael said. "The ones Vanessa suggested we bring out and display properly instead of keeping in storage." Eleanor glanced at her daughter-in-law, who was watching the exchange with genuine pleasure rather than the calculated social performance she'd previously exhibited. "Family history matters," Vanessa said simply. "Ethan should grow up knowing where he comes from, all sides of his heritage." As they said their goodbyes, Eleanor was struck by the transformation that had occurred in just 3 weeks. The house that had once felt like hostile territory now felt like family space. Vanessa, who had treated Eleanor as an intrusion to be managed, now embraced her with genuine warmth. Most importantly, Michael stood taller, his confidence visibly returning as he found his voice within his marriage. On the drive back to Birmingham, Catherine marveled at the changes. "I still can't believe that's the same Vanessa who wouldn't let you hold your own grandson 3 weeks ago. What do you think happened?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. I think several things converged at once. The financial reality became impossible to ignore. Michael finally found the courage to stand firm rather than enabling harmful patterns. And Vanessa faced the truth about her motivations, painful as that was. But you were the catalyst, Catherine insisted. If you hadn't cancelled those credit cards and forced the issue, they'd still be drowning in debt while pretending everything was perfect. Sometimes love requires difficult choices, Eleanor acknowledged. The easy path would have been continuing to provide money without questions, accepting my limited role in Ethan's life, watching Michael diminish himself to keep the peace. But that wouldn't have been love, it would have been complicity. As they crossed the bridge overlooking Lake Martin, the water reflecting the vibrant autumn colors, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not because everything was perfect. The road ahead for Michael and Vanessa would include setbacks and struggles as they rebuilt their financial security and relationship patterns, but because they were now traveling that road together with honesty rather than deception. Back home in Birmingham, Eleanor placed the framed generational photo on her mantel, the visual reminder of family continuity bringing her joy each time she passed it. That evening, she received a text from Vanessa, the first direct communication. Initiated without Michael as intermediary. Thank you for not giving up on us even when I tried to push you away. Ethan deserves to know the strong woman his grandmother is. We all do. Eleanor typed her response carefully. Family isn't about perfection. It's about growing together through challenges. I'm proud of the difficult work you're doing. Later that week, Eleanor met with Rachel to finalize the terms of Ethan's educational trust and discuss the structured support she would provide during Michael and Vanessa's financial recovery. They're actually ideal candidates for rehabilitation, Rachel observed. Once Vanessa committed to the process, she approached it with impressive determination. And Michael seems to have found his financial confidence again. They're both finding their authentic voices, Eleanor agreed. Separately and together. Your approach worked better than I expected, Rachel admitted. When you first told me your plan to cut off the financial enabling but offer structured support for their recovery, I thought there would be more resistance. There might have been, Eleanor acknowledged, if I'd led with judgment rather than boundaries. The key was making it clear that I wasn't punishing or abandoning them, I was offering a different kind of support that addressed the real issues instead of the presenting symptoms. As she drove home from the meeting, Eleanor reflected on the journey of the past month. What had begun as a simple visit to meet her new grandson had evolved into a profound family reckoning, painful but ultimately healing. By refusing to accept the limited role Vanessa had tried to assign her and challenging the financial deception that threatened her son's future, she had created space for authentic transformation. The strength required hadn't been in dramatic confrontation or ultimatums, but in the quiet courage of standing firmly in her truth, that love without honesty wasn't really love at all, that enabling harmful patterns wasn't helping, and that family relationships required mutual respect to thrive. Eleanor Williams had spent her career making difficult financial decisions that affected people's lives and livelihoods. But this, standing firm when it would have been easier to capitulate, insisting on truth when lies would have been more comfortable, loving her family enough to risk their anger, this had been her most important executive decision yet. As she turned onto her street, her phone chimed with a video call from Michael. When she answered, his smiling face appeared alongside Vanessa's, with Ethan balanced between them. We're just calling to say goodnight to grandmother, Michael explained as Ethan gurgled and reached toward the screen. Our new nightly ritual. Right, buddy? The simple gesture, including Eleanor in their evening routine rather than excluding her from their family life, spoke volumes about the new path they were forging together. Good night, my darlings, Eleanor replied, her heart full. I'll see you this weekend. As she ended the call and walked into her home, Eleanor felt a sense of peace that had eluded her since that tense day when Vanessa had declared, "This isn't a hotel." The words that had been intended to diminish her had instead launched a necessary revolution, one that was healing her family in ways she couldn't have imagined. Sometimes the most loving response to rejection wasn't retreat but revolution, not with anger or vengeance, but with the quiet strength of boundaries rooted in unwavering love. Eleanor had spent a lifetime building her career, her financial security, and her family relationships. At 72, she discovered that protecting those precious investments sometimes required the courage to say no in order to create space for a more authentic yes. That night, as she prepared for bed, Eleanor smiled at the generational photo on her nightstand. For generations of strong Williams women, each facing their own challenges, each finding their way forward with determination and love. Ethan was the newest branch of that family tree, and thanks to the difficult but necessary confrontations of the past month, he would grow up in a home built on honesty rather than appearances, substance rather than status. The credit cards had been cancelled, but something far more valuable had been activated, the courage to face difficult truths together, as a family united by love strong enough to weather honesty. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us. As Eleanor parked beside Catherine's car in the gravel driveway, she took a moment to appreciate how far they had come since that fateful October day when Vanessa's sharp, "This isn't a hotel," had changed everything. The cottage door opened. Before Eleanor could knock, revealing Michael with 8-month-old Ethan balanced on his hip. The baby's face lit up with recognition, pudgy arms reaching eagerly for his grandmother. "There's my handsome boy," Eleanor cooed, gathering Ethan into her arms. He smelled of baby shampoo and the faint sweetness that seemed uniquely his. "Ready for your big day?" "As ready as a baby can be for cold water on his head," Michael laughed, kissing Eleanor's cheek. Catherine and Thomas are already inside helping Vanessa with the final preparations. Eleanor carried Ethan into the cottage, marveling at how different this home felt from the sprawling showplace they had sold 3 months earlier. Where the Colonial had been impressive but cold, this lakeside cottage radiated warmth and authenticity. Handmade quilts draped across simple furniture, family photos lined the pine mantel, and evidence of Ethan's daily life, toys, books, a well-used high chair, were integrated throughout rather than hidden away. In the kitchen, Vanessa stood arranging flowers with Catherine while Thomas reviewed some documents at the breakfast table. The scene of easy family collaboration would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. "Eleanor." Vanessa greeted her with a genuine smile that had replaced her former practiced perfection. Her appearance had changed subtly but significantly: simpler clothing, minimal makeup, hair in a practical style that suited her natural beauty far better than the elaborate coiffure she'd previously maintained. "We were just debating whether these wildflowers look too casual for the reception." "They're perfect," Eleanor assured her, bouncing Ethan gently. "Natural beauty suits this occasion." The observation carried layers of meaning that Vanessa clearly understood, judging by her appreciative nod. The journey toward authenticity hadn't been easy for her, but the results were transformative, not just in external appearances but in the peace that now softened her features. Thomas rose from the table, gathering the papers into a folder. "Financial rehab plan, version 3.0, he explained with a wink toward Eleanor. "Ahead of schedule on debt reduction, behind schedule on retirement contributions, but overall trending positive." As Eleanor's youngest and the attorney in the family, Thomas had taken on the role of financial accountability partner for Michael and Vanessa, reviewing their progress monthly and helping them navigate the complex process of debt settlement. His professional expertise combined with family understanding had proven invaluable. 12 more months until we're completely debt-free," Vanessa announced with quiet pride. "And we've already started rebuilding our emergency fund." The transformation in Vanessa's priorities still amazed Eleanor. The woman who had once defined her worth through luxury purchases and status symbols now took greater pride in financial responsibility and authentic relationships. "And how's the job going?" Eleanor asked, referring to the part-time position Vanessa had taken at the local library's children's program, a far cry from her former marketing director role but aligned with her newfound values of community contribution over corporate status. "I read The Very Hungry Caterpillar 4 times yesterday to a very demanding audience of toddlers," Vanessa laughed. "It's the hardest work I've ever loved. And the flexible schedule means plenty of time with this little man." She stroked Ethan's cheek lovingly. As they prepared to leave for the church, Eleanor watched Michael and Vanessa move around each other with the comfortable rhythm of partners rather than the tense choreography of their previous dynamic. Michael no longer checked for Vanessa's approval before speaking, and Vanessa no longer controlled every aspect of their presentation to the world. The small stone church overlooking the lake had stood for over a century, weathering storms both literal and metaphorical. Its simple beauty provided the perfect setting for Ethan's baptism, authentic, grounded in tradition yet welcoming of new life and possibilities. Eleanor took her place in the front pew beside Catherine and Thomas, watching as Michael and Vanessa presented Ethan to the community. As godmother, Eleanor would soon join them at the baptismal font, but for now, she savored the moment of witnessing her family united in celebration. When Pastor Jensen invited Eleanor forward to take her place as godmother, she rose with dignity, the weight of the responsibility settling comfortably on her shoulders. This wasn't just a ceremonial role, it was a covenant to help guide Ethan's spiritual and moral development throughout his life. "Eleanor Williams, do you promise to support this child in his life in Christ?" Pastor Jensen asked, his voice carrying through the stone sanctuary. "I do, with God's help," Eleanor responded clearly, her hand joining Michael's and Vanessa's beneath Ethan's small body as the baptismal water trickled over his forehead. Ethan's startled expression at the cold water soon gave way to curious fascination with the light streaming through the stained glass windows. As Pastor Jensen presented him to the congregation, Ethan reached toward the colorful beams as if trying to grasp the light itself. "May he always reach for light and truth," the pastor observed with a smile, returning Ethan to Vanessa's arms. The small reception afterward, held in the church's garden overlooking the lake, reflected the new values that guided the young family: simple elegance rather than ostentatious display, meaningful connections rather than social networking, genuine joy rather than curated appearances. Eleanor found herself engaged in conversation with Pastor Jensen as they watched Michael introducing Ethan to various church members. "You know," the pastor commented thoughtfully, "I've been in ministry for 30 years, and I've rarely seen such a profound transformation in a young family. 6 months ago, they were headed for financial and marital disaster. Today, they're among the most grounded couples in our congregation. They've done the hard work themselves," Eleanor replied modestly. "I just helped create the conditions where honesty became possible." Pastor Jensen smiled knowingly. "Don't diminish your role, Eleanor. What you did took tremendous courage, standing firm when it would have been easier to enable, offering structured support rather than unconditional funding, loving them enough to risk their anger. Those aren't small things. They were necessary things," Eleanor said simply. "Love sometimes requires difficult choices." "Indeed it does," the pastor agreed. "The kind of love that wants what's best for others rather than what's most comfortable for ourselves, that's remarkably rare. Many families remain locked in dysfunctional patterns for generations because no one has the courage to disrupt the status quo." As Eleanor considered his words, Vanessa approached with Ethan, who was beginning to show signs of overstimulation from the day's activities. "Would you mind taking him for a walk?" Vanessa asked Eleanor. "He always settles so well for you, and I need to thank some people before they leave." The simple request, Vanessa voluntarily sharing Ethan's care rather than maintaining rigid control, highlighted how far they'd come. "Of course," Eleanor replied, gathering her grandson into her arms. "We'll explore the garden a bit." As she walked with Ethan among the spring blooms, pointing out butterflies and whispering the names of flowers, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. The confrontation that had begun with Vanessa's harsh dismissal had evolved into a family renewal more profound than Eleanor could have imagined. A gentle hand on her shoulder interrupted her thoughts. Michael had joined them, his expression contemplative as he watched his son discovering the world in his grandmother's arms. "I've been thinking about that day you left," he said quietly. "When Vanessa said this wasn't a hotel. I was so afraid of conflict that I almost let you walk out of our lives rather than addressing the real issues." "But you didn't," Eleanor reminded him. "You found your courage when it mattered most." "Because you showed me what courage looks like," Michael replied. "Not angry confrontation or dramatic ultimatums, but quiet strength rooted in love and truth." Eleanor shifted Ethan to her other arm, his weight a precious anchor to the present moment. "That kind of courage has always been inside you, Michael. You just needed to remember it. Do you know what Vanessa said to me last night?" Michael's voice carried a hint of wonder. "She said she's grateful for everything that happened, even the painful parts. That she'd rather live this authentic life in our small cottage than maintain that facade of perfection in the big house." "That's true transformation," Eleanor observed. "Not just changing circumstances but changing perspective." As they completed their circuit of the garden, they found Vanessa engaged in animated conversation with Catherine and Thomas, her laughter free and uninhibited in a way Eleanor had never witnessed during those tense